And welcome to the next part of modding an asset. This is Stormzlord, technical gaming podcast host. The podcast is produced by the Dungeon Crawler Network. Join me as we journey into the technical side of gaming. This week we're going to continue the primer on how to modify an asset. We've done a few different things with the GUI front end. We've also gone ahead and added a few other assets that I'll list below because they looked better. I am not an artist in any way. I take what's out there, like these assets, I modify them, I use them, and there's some extremely good assets out there on the asset store for not only GUI, front end, back end, whatever you need, AI, things like that. But again, let's talk about this. Let's talk about what we've changed and where we're going forward. All right, so here we are. Let's look at us now. You start it in the editor. You'll see it looks fairly similar. I spent a lot of time this week modifying the model view controller aspect of how this works. It was not say convoluted, but more tightly wound together than I would have liked when I looked at this asset. So what I did is I pulled it apart. I like things, like I said previously, to control what it should control and to ask something else to control something if it's just the front end, right? So if it's the back end saying, hey, I need the front end to do this, the back end doesn't actually do the change. It asks the front end object to make the change for it. Things like that, to me, that's important, especially as you realize that in 20 years, tic-tac-toe is going to play the same way. You're going to want to update the front end maybe, but 20 years, you play the game the same way. You can leave the back end the way it is, leave the middle the way it is, do whatever you want. All right, so let's go into this. Let's press play again. Now we press play. We've left 0 as the human, X as the computer. I'll probably change these colors. I don't really like them, but that's the way they were. But for now, it'll work. Notice I've changed that a little bit. It works into an X the same way. It's tracking. Right now, I'm going to make these cubes spin as opposed to just show that, but there. So that was a player 2. I let AI win. X's and O's, it tracks all that. It knows all that. It's interesting the way it does it, and we'll look into it and how I modified some of it, but not all of it. All right, so let's stop. We talked about last week the canvas. We talked about the player frame, the start frame, the background, the title, all that sort of stuff. But what I've done is I've gone ahead and changed the board itself. The board was using these board cells here, which I made disappear. Right, use those cells. I left them in there so it could still work if I needed it to for example purposes. But if you look very closely, what I discovered after a period of time is that this board manager script has, again, public elements. There's an array of cubes, in this case, grid cell script. And we'll bring that up. This grid cell script is the script behind the cell, right? In this case, it was the purple cell, but now it's or pink cell. This is the gray cell, right? So every one of these cubes has a copy of this script or an instance of this script. So it has memory for that particular instance. The reason that is I want each instance to know whether you're an X or whether you're an O, right? And then it can count through it. Now, notice again this list here of elements, right? These elements you drag and drop over. I just take the number 2, drop it on number 2. Well, if you look at this script, you'll see that this grid cell script has a public variables for that, right? So we have, where are they? Board manager, wrong script. So board manager, we have the public variables right here, right? So this grid cell script, here's the array, right? Here you say it's an array. Didn't tell how many. Here is where you give the size. We have 9 arrays. Now, in C# and Java and C++, other languages, things start out at 0 as the first number, not 1. So it gets a little confusing in this particular setup that the author decided to call it cubecell 1 instead of cubecell 0. His choice, or her choice, whoever choice, their choice. I didn't change it. I left it as it is. That was part of what messed me up for a while this week, was I kept blinking in between the two, trying to figure out, well, which number is it, 1 or 0? I sometimes prefer things to be numbered from 0 so they match, but I didn't want to mess it up too much and leave it the way it was, so I just did, but that threw me off, so I probably should have changed it anyways. So back to the script. The grid cell script is an instance for each one. All right, so the states and all this, we know what the state is as it goes. It's X or an O. Let's walk through this for a second. If we're over here and we start, all right, so it's going to start it. It's not going to do anything here yet. But you notice it is, I'll clear it, it is writing to the log. It is touching it. Right? It knows its buttoning is firing, which is one of the changes I made as well. So if we go back, look at the script, you'll see the GUI manager has nothing about mouse down. Right? Now, that's the difference between the last asset, or the previous version of the asset, and this version is I've used a different method. Well, a new method that wasn't around when that original asset was written. It's called on mouse over. On mouse over is what happens when you click on anywhere in the screen, right? It just keeps logging it. It click, 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 click. Doesn't matter what you click on, right? Click a play button, human button, 0, X, what, doesn't matter, background. It fires on mouse over. Now, think carefully though when you work with Unity, when you work with different game engines, however it's going to work, you've got to know what you've clicked on. Now in this case, I've tied this on mouse over to that particular grid cell script, right? So notice when you click, you get a method that says entered button up fire. Right? Now, I don't have this anywhere in this script, that debug. See, I've archived or commented out the ones I was using for debugging. One of the tricks I do is I put in a log statement that tells me where I am, what I've entered, so I can track things as they go. Now, they have debuggers nowadays that do that, and that's fine, and that's great. I'm just doing what I've done for the last 20 years. I put it in here so I know I'm coming in and I can control it. One of the things I have yet to do for Unity is either purchase or write a log tool that will allow me to tell it, I want to log for debug, I want you to log for errors, or whatever. In this particular case, I'm just writing a log file without paying attention to it. I then comment it out when I don't want to see it, put it back out when I want to. I've also left a few other comments around, which we'll talk about in the future. But okay, so button on mouse over, right? So in other words, your mouse has gone over, right? The mouse has gone over something. So this event's going to fire when the grid cell script is a mouse over. But that just means the mouse went over it. Within that, on mouse over, I then get, if the input from that is a get mouse button down 0, which means your left mouse button went down, right? Then this event fires right here, get mouse button down 0. They have similar events in the Unreal Engine. They have similar events in Lumberyard. When we talk about those in the next couple of weeks, we'll look at those and how that's going to work. But this is what we're looking at. Within Unity, there's particular ways you check for a mouse button has gone down, which one it was it a keyboard, all this sort of stuff. Now, if you look at the previous GUI handler, it's really kludgy, but you get an input, button up fire, right? You got to figure out what that is. Then you got to figure out, well, if it's a ray hit, what hit it? And, what did you click? In other words, what object did the ray cast hit? Once you get the object, you can then, is it a cell? If then, which cell is it? Again, it worked. Kludgy, but it worked. One of the things I like about Unity, it's been around for a while. They've gone through the kludgy stages. They're now moving more towards this is the way we have it, and this is the way it's going to work, and this is the way it works really well. Languages, much like human languages, computer languages are not dead. They continually evolve. Whether you're C++, whether you're Lua, and I have Alexa turned on again. So whether you use those languages that are older, 20, 30, 40-year-old languages, they've evolved. They've found the better way to do things that the community has agreed is a better way to do it. Same thing with Unity. It's been around for a long time now. They've made improvements. They've made changes as they go along. One of these is this way of mouse button down. To me, it's a tremendous way to do it. It makes it much easier to figure things out. When you're consumed about watching the mouse buttons, with my games and Digital Pepper Studios, actually I use another asset called Rewired. It tracks all that for me. It's got whether I'm on Xbox or PC or mobile, it does all that for me. So I just hand that over to Rewired, let them worry about it, and then I know to set up the way I need to configure it, and it works. So, but anyways, for this, I went ahead and I didn't use that one. We used the get mouse button down. Okay, so get mouse button down. Comment on a couple codes we didn't need there. I'm then checking to see whether this is a human player, right? This is something that they have previously set up. In the grid cell script, they're checking, well, I entered the ability to go in and say, hey, current player play is this cell empty? That was theirs. And then we go in. Now, I did add the rotate, which isn't working yet, so we'll fix that in the future sometime. Currently, I've set to go rotate left, rotate right, which when you click on one of them, it clicks left. It's supposed to go slower than that, but it's doing instantaneous rotate. I didn't fix it yet. I will get to it. Just hadn't got it done. I didn't want to delay the podcast further, so I'm like, well, I'll get to the rotate later. It Unity has that ability to rotate it at different speeds. Right now, it's doing a instantaneous move. Left takes it to 0, and right takes it. No, excuse me. Left takes it to an X. Right takes it to a 0. Right. So, correct. Then we have, after that, it sets the state of that cell or this particular cell that we're in. Notice I did say this, right? Because I want to let the base maintenance person, whoever's coming behind me, to know that I mean this object rotate left, or this object rotate right. I could erase that and it would mean the same thing, right? This, to me, lets the person know intuitively that's this object. It's got a left, rotate right, which we'll look at in a second. But all right, so it then sets the X or the 0, and it sets a false that the cell is no longer empty. Part of its AI is to determine whether or not a cell is empty, and if the cell is empty, which one is the best for it. Okay, so then we go into next turn, which changes the player 1, player 2, title here. That swaps based on this next turn. Now, this is an interesting part for me. That next turn to swap the player, right? So this is the game info is over here. So if we flick on that, and I didn't do a diagram of how this all works, but I could, but I'm not going to do that. We have next turn. Okay. So in here, we then look at the state to make sure it's in GUI, which is a state of it's playing. And then we have this line here. I commented this line out for a particular reason. It works. It's very shorthand. It works really well. What you're saying is the state, which is a variable in this game info, state equals, and then there's it's basically an if statement. If state equals, player 1, and then the answer is then make state equal to player 2. If state is not equal to player 1, make state equal to player 1, which is very shorthand and very one line that allows you to do the same thing as here, with the exception of this player's turn next, which we'll talk about in a minute. This is very good. It is very fast in looking at the line. How do I say this? But it doesn't really help the next person who's going to come along and maintain the code. They may or may not know the shorthand of an if statement. If they don't, they've got to learn it, which is fine. They can learn it, but you're throwing in something, and the comment I've heard in the past is, let's make things as short as we can, as one-lined as possible, so we get rid of all this superfluous stuff, and it's as quick as possible. Well, in another episode, we'll look at it too, but your compiler is going to do that, right? The compiled code is what's supposed to run faster. The reason these tools exist is to allow developers to be able to read in English or in the code language, right? In this case, C#, in normal fashion, right? So we could take all the periods out of a book and make it shorter, and you'd intuitively know how it works. That's fine, right? But you're not helping the next person behind you. When you're writing code, you have to think about not only you, right, how you're doing it now, but also the person who's going to come behind and maintain this code. In this case, this person is probably going to maintain his own code. That's fine. He knows exactly how this works. But an environment where you have somebody who completely different person who maintains code than the person who wrote it, this line is confusing for your normal coder. Your average coder is not going to know the shorthand abbreviations or shorthand methods for every single operator. This works, but to me, it's more of the person the writer trying to demonstrate they're really good at code than they want to help the other person. So what I did, and because I like to help the next person because I've been that next person before, is I break it out into this, which says exactly the same thing except this line here and this line here. It says if state is equal to player 1, make state equal to player 2. If not, make it equal to player 1. I then added this piece here, but if I wanted to do this, I couldn't do that up here. I had to add this because you're going to put these brackets, which another pet peeve of mine. A lot of people like to put the brackets up on that line like this, right? And then do that. Some people prefer that way of coding. Me, I prefer lined up brackets. I can then, before we had editors that could give us little dotted lines where everything went, I could see they lined up. So that's just a personal preference. But again, two personal preferences here. Make the code easier on the next person, right? Comment probably a lot more than I did through this. I should have commented more. But also don't try and write something super, super smart that only you're going to understand because someone else is going to have to maintain it. Yes, that'll make them a better coder to learn how to read that, but you're really not helping because this line here, right, and these lines here, with the exception of those two, compile down to pretty much the same stuff, right? C# compiles to CIL, right? Java compiles down to Java bytecode that is then going to be run in a Java virtual machine. So it already goes down to a more efficient way of running. That's not the purpose of these languages. The purpose of the languages are to spread out coding so that more people can do it. Because not everybody wants to write as efficiently as possible, which is great. It shows your ability to write efficiently, but it doesn't help anybody, because it's even the way it's written, it's not going to be more efficient. Once it's compiled, it's going to compile to the same stuff, right? So, again, that's my preference. Some people like to be more efficient in their code, and again, their call. In real life, when I have, with my team members, one of the things I do is we do code reviews, right? And I make sure that when the team leads do the code reviews, they focus on readability of code. That's the purpose of this code, is to make it readable. If we wanted to make it non-readable, we could just directly write assembly. But we're not. The purpose is so it's easier to do and more readable, and it gets to the same place. So help out your next person that's going to maintain this and make it a little more easy to read. Anyways, we'll step off that soapbox. All right, so back to here. We do all this. You notice then it doesn't rotate left of this. It comes down to here. It doesn't rotate left, rotate right. I have a method down here called rotate n degrees, and blah, blah, does the rotation in a slurp for Unity. Notice as well that rotate left and rotate right are private events, private methods that call a method called rotate. And then it's -90 or 90 degrees. I like to say laziness through efficiency, right? Not efficiency like writing it in one line, but efficiency like I could have copied this code and put it in two different methods, rotate left, rotate right, and just change the degrees here. But why am I going to do that? I have to maintain that in two places. But I know one would turn left, one turn right. So I set up these methods to do just that. All right, they're private methods. They go in, they call this. It's not for anybody else but the person who's maintaining it, and there we go. Now, notice it goes in, does rotations, sets it all, right? Moves it exactly 90 degrees. And we're good to go. Okay, so that's how that works. So now, what else I want to talk about is private and public. So I know we've looked at some code here, and we've looked at a few different things. We looked at the way they worked and the way I split some things up before, as opposed to the way the previous writer did. Again, I like the model view controller, but I also like to have items that are private, public. So I specifically did some things that I could show you, and then I do this anyways. Let me pull a couple up. All right, now we're going to do this again. I've set up a couple methods like rotate left, rotate right. I wanted to talk about coding as well with this. When you have variables in a model view controller way, even if you're running them yourselves, certain variables you want the model or the GUI front end to be able to maintain it only by themselves, but the back end may have to do something with them. You really, and vice versa, you give them the back end and you want the front end to be able to tell it, hey, you know what, we've changed here, you need to change in the back. You want to set those up in such a way that they're available to everybody, but they can't make a direct change. Because what if we wanted to change the back end, right? What if the back end didn't want to be a particular way? If we let the front end directly make a change, then you've got to change the front end too. I don't want to do that. So I'll give you an example. We have a couple variables here. Game over, a Boolean, and game on, also a Boolean. Both are what's called private. Now in Unity, you can take away the word private, and it still is private. By default, if you don't put the word public, the variable or method is private. Private means only can be changed by this particular thing. Now, again, I know by default without writing it, it's there. I prefer to write it. Again, that's just me. But if I have these variables, game over and game on, I want this backend to have those for a reason. But I want the GUI manager to be able to also, or GUI info, or game info, whichever, make a change to this as well. Remember, GUI manager is the front end, game info is the middle, and in this case, because there is no database, the board manager is the quote-unquote back end. So I have a variable that's public, or a method, excuse me, that's public, called isGameOver. This isGameOver is a method that returns, it simply returns game over. That's all it does. I could make game over public and you could directly hit it. But what if I had some changes to make in the back end? Again, if I didn't want you to see those, or I want to obfuscate, let's forget using that word. If I want to hide it in the back, I can. So I do the same thing for isGameOn, right? I just hit it in the back and we're good to go. Now I also named another one here, game is on, right? Which turns game on to true, because you want to get the ability to affect it if you want. You could do a set get, and there's a way in Unity to do a set get in one word, one line again. But when it does it, it's still public. So it leaves the variable public. So I don't really agree or understand why they're doing it. If you're going to make it a public variable, why are you doing a getter and setter? Personal preference, it's the way I do it. Again, we'll talk through the same personal preferences when we go into Unreal. You'll see they work the same way. It's just C++, right? And again, when we get to Amazon, Lumberyard, it uses Lua. Same thing. It's just a front-end language that compiles to another language that can run faster. All right, so we'll get to those. So I want to talk about that, right? And that's the way the variables work. So now, again, if we go back to this one, if we're playing this one and it's waiting for us, we press save, so let's rebuild it. In Unity, when you press play, it only works if the compiled code doesn't have any errors. So anyways, here we are. Press play. You click. Right? It's making changes on the back end. Notice it's also tracking what cell was clicked. Right through each one. It's checking all those, and it's a draw. Okay. Now let's talk about something else. Game draw, right? It's a draw. Notice these are images, right? These are images out there within the GUI handler here. It's a draw. Player 1 wins, player 2 wins, tic-tac-toe, and that's a way to approach it. Now, something differently I do is when you have turn on indicator. If you notice, play, and right now it says player 1's turn, right? And it says player 2's turn, player 1's turn, right? So it's going back and forth. Obviously, that's how it's going to work. That's because in the game manager, I have a particular object that tells it, this one, turn indicator, that it's an indicator over here, and I want to reference it from GUI manager. What I do is I change the text. Now, currently in here, GUI manager, we have the display next turn, right? It takes a variable of, well, whose turn is it? And then it displays that. This is where you do localization. Not inline, which means the code in here. What I would do is I would make the entire thing, except the number, into a property file somewhere, right? in a folder somewhere else, where the translator changes those. The translator doesn't need to go into the code. That's the way I would set it up. I don't have it set up that way. We can talk about that later, but that's what I would do. So for translation-wise, you make a translation in this particular folder or file so that you can just give this file to a translator and say, translate this based on this game, and this is how you do it. And then you just simply do a configuration change. Well, I want this to be English, French, German, whatever. So in a future thing, we'll talk about localization, but that's one way I would do it. Is hard-coded messages are not the best, right? And it seems very simple, right, to go in here and retype the code. But when you're more involved with larger groups, larger teams of developers, whether it's games or business software or fun software, what do you want to do? To take the messages that are shown to a user and put them in a properties file or a database, either way is a one good step. Then you can make those changes on the fly without having to recompile your code, move the code to the next environment, things like that. So I didn't do this here because this was a simple, primer about asset management, asset modification. So localization, which I'm going to do an episode on eventually, get to one, that is a good piece to do, right? Take it out and configure it as a property file. That way, whether your user decides, I want the language to be different, or I want the language in German versus French or whatever, you can do that really simply using this property file, make a change. You don't have to change your code, right? That's the interesting part, especially when you get into mobile games and Xbox and Sony and all that stuff. When you go through a whole testing process, it takes weeks to get it into Xbox or Sony. Now, Google, it does it usually within 20, 30 minutes. Apple, same way, 20, 30 minutes to get a change into their stuff. But there's this whole rigorous testing process that if you're going to do localization, take it out of your code and put it outside. If you're going to do any messaging to the user, take it out of your code, put it outside in some sort of framework, which we'll talk about again, like I said. But that way it's easier to make those changes on you as a developer or team of developers than if you left them in the code. That's just, again, something how I feel. It's safer to make a change on a back end like that than it is to going into the code. Invariably, people make mistakes with code, right? They're going to make a mistake. It's going to compile wrong or something. They're going to make a comma in the wrong place, whatever they're going to do, mess it up. This is what happens because people make mistakes. It happens. If you just put the language in another file or in a database, so they misspell a word, it's still going to get in. The software is still going to work. And if they do misspell a word, it's a real simple change to change it. You go to the database and you change it, right? Now, with a file, you have to make a change, save the file. Next time it comes through, the verbiage is changed, right? We'll talk about that because it's a really exciting topic to me, which is weird, but that's me. So we'll look at that. So this is the changes we've made. We have taken an asset that was written for Unity 4, I believe, and now that is working in Unity 2018.3, which is the most current version, I believe, or very close to. And we've allowed it to work. We've made some few changes to its look, but it's functioning the same way, right? We've done that on purpose. We purposely went in, we made some changes to make it more up to date using the current GUI. We've looked at it for going into making it a little more maintainable for the next user or coder, whoever's going to code things. These are things when you do assets you want to do. Right now, I said I want to talk about the assets I'm using. So I will look at that. And again, because I'm not the best artist, I went out and I grabbed a significant number, or 3 or 4 or 5 actually, of different GUI front ends that I wanted to look at and maybe pieces from, right? So Dice Master, right, which I'll link below, is one of the assets I pulled in. This cube that we're actually using is, if you notice, one of the Dice Master dice. It is actually a normal die. I just made a different front end material for it. So notice this is the die, new D6. I went in and I created one for prefab. Whoop, not that one. I created another one. Where did it go? Huh. It's somewhere. I have created a image or a image that would wrap around into the cube, which is a whole other topic, but we'll bring that up too. if you go in the Dice Master and you go to textures, textures, that's what it is. You notice D6 double. This is what the image really looks like, right? It's just an X and O. It's at the bottom of the page. And I'll bring it up here. So there's the image right there. Right? We brought it in, I imported it into Unity. I mapped it to a material in a shader. So we're in there, we're good to go. And then I applied it to a cube. So this is an object. This is how it would look when you're just looking at the particular shader. But when you play it, come on. All right, we're playing it. We'll press play. Again, that's a cube, right? It has 6 sides. It looks like it's not right now, but if you go over here and we'll look at the top, you'll see it's a cube. I simply used the dice and I changed the image because I wanted to make it rotate. Well, I didn't get it to work yet, but you'll see it. Eventually I'll get that one to work when I can dig up the time to make that work. So anyway, so Dice Master. I also was looking into clean flat icon to see if I could get an icon that I liked. Didn't find one in there yet. I've used it in other stuff. The Fantasy GUI 5. This is the black or this gray stone material background. It's also is this play button and the buttons here. So there's that one. Again, I'll list all these. I did bring in Gem, but didn't use it. I pulled in the GUI Elementals pack. Didn't use it. But that's part of what I do is I bring things in, I see how they work, and if I like it, if I don't, and then I decide, okay, I do like it, I don't like it. If I don't like it and I don't use it at all, right, like clean flat icon, I can just delete it, right? It won't hurt anything. Watch, I actually used it, but no, I didn't. So it's going to delete all that stuff. And I get a cleaner way of looking at it. I can do the same thing when I go into Gem example, GUI Elemental pack. I can get rid of those. I pulled them in. I wanted to see how they would look, how they would work. Did I find something? But I didn't like it, right? So I'm like, oh, I don't need it. I have this X and O, which happened to come out of the GUI, the Fantasy GUI. So we have that, and this is taking a long time to delete. It's got a bucket load of icons that I've used in other apps. I just didn't use it on this one. And we're still waiting. So since it's dead air, we're just going to go ahead and say thank you for joining. This is modifying an asset, or episode 2, or the last episode. There'll be no cliff ending, big cliffhanger ending. We're simply going to say thank you for joining us. This is Stormzlord, Dungeon Crawler Network. You can check all our podcasts. You can check out From the Ashes. You can check out Tales of Tamriel, all within the Dungeon Crawler Network, dungeoncrawlernetwork.com. See how that works. You can check me out at Digital Pepper Studios. Our games, we have 2D platformer we're working on. I've just started an RTS strategy game because I can't work on one thing at a time. That would be slow. So I am working on several different things. There's some concept games out on Digital Pepper Studios. Check out our different games on iOS, on Android. We're still working on, like I said, one to go to the Xbox, and honestly, I'm trying to think about going to the Mac store. This real-time strategy game, I'm aiming for the Mac store. I'm actually coding that in Unity on a Mac. I don't know if I'll ever get it to Steam, to PC. I might. Right now, I'm working towards getting it on Mac. But again, one thing about Unity, one thing about Unreal is you code it and then it can go to different things, different machines, Mac, console, PC, Steam, Linux, depending what you want to do. That's one of the beauties of these game engines is you can code it once and then compile it to what you want to do. Now, in this case for Mac and PC, you have, if you have a PC and Linux, you can do them from the Unity from your PC. But if you want to do a Unity and then do a Mac or an iOS, you have to have it on a Mac, which in some cases I'll write it on Android and then move it over, or excuse me, write it on PC and then move over to Mac. But that has nothing to do with the extradition information of where I'm saying goodbye. So anyways, we'll get on that tangent later. Again, thank you for joining. Thank you for listening. Check out any of our podcasts. And if you want to, send me an email, stormzlord@outlook.com. Put a comment into YouTube, or everyone to put a comment. If you have any questions, let me know. If you want to see something different, let me know. If you want me to go on a tangent talking about just about anything, I can do that as well. Thank you, and have a good day.